Good morning and welcome to the Return Homestead. My name is Mike and my wife Marty and I homestead 50 acres in southeastern Kentucky. Today we're dealing with something that I imagine everybody's dealing with right now, and that's the excessive amount of rain that we've been having. This strange weather is creating some problems on our property that we need to deal with. Water doesn't just fall from the sky, it then has to flow downhill, and we want to manage where it goes. One of the most difficult things for us to convey in our videos is just how much of an elevation change there is on this small portion of our property. And you get some idea of it from the staircase that goes from the upper level down to the guest house that we're doing the remodel on. So you can tell from this, that's a significant change in elevation over a very short distance. And this only represents a small fraction of the actual slope as you continue up to the peak. And the house is getting closer to the peak. It's not quite at the peak. So even the upper house, the one we're living in right now, still gets a significant amount of water flowing through the yard from higher up on the ridge. So we have some unique problems on our property that won't be encountered by everybody. If you select your property correctly, you'll be looking for a property that doesn't have elevation changes if you can manage that. So just knowing that there's an elevation change should be enough to give you pause and make you think about where water goes. Because when you look at this hillside, you can see where the chickens run. But if you pay close attention, those are also low spots in the hillside. And that also means that water will run through there as well. And so I have to know when water falls in the upper corner of my chicken yard up here, where's it going to go from there? Is it going to run straight down the hill? Is it going to come halfway down the hill, hit this little flat spot, and then come this direction, and eventually wind up under my staircase? And then once it's under the stairs, what's going to happen to it? Is it just going to run straight down the hill and then up under the house? And that's what we've been trying to do here today, or what I'm working on doing, is getting this water that is underneath the stairs. It does run in quite a substantial torrent down underneath the stairs. It's on solid rock there, so I'm comfortable with it coming down the hill there. But then I want to turn it and get it away from the house before I let it to flow downhill any further. And this is where it all begins for us. A seemingly insignificant old fence post buried up in a tree line. This is the top corner of our property. It is about 10 feet below the top of the ridge line. So there's not much above this point in our property that is going to feed water onto us. So this is really sort of the place where it all begins, and we do have some water that's already flowing downhill onto our property, and you can kind of see this elevation change as we head down towards the main house. And so the water does flow nicely across our garden. Everything gets wet, but then it drains off quickly. This is a very clay impacted soil. So it holds water very well, and it would probably hold water too much if we didn't have this elevation change that helps to move the water downhill. Now, most of the water will go into the clay, it gets down to the rock layer and then migrates down the rock underneath the clay and then on off the property. But everything from the top of the ridge down to the house, because of the way the elevation changes, it all comes to this point, which is not ideal. So this is the low spot in the backyard. And this is going to be the place where all of the water is going to rush down to as it comes off of the garden and the chicken coops. It's going to run down to this spot. And then there is this little bit of a bump before we get into the ditch that would be able to take the water downhill. So the property was laid out in a very difficult manner when the house was first installed. This telephone pole kind of represents a sort of ridge between telephone poles. It's a high spot in the property where everything goes much lower on one side and just low enough on the other side that it can collect water. But we would have to collect about 2 feet of water in this hole before it would actually flow over and run downhill. So there is the first problem that we encounter in our water migration across the property. We do have one unique advantage on our property, and that's that across the entire 50 acres we do have an elevation change. So there is a definitive direction that water will flow off of the property. You can see it going downhill the entire time. It's not like the property is mostly flat with some low spots in it. We have some significant elevation changes, and that makes some parts of managing water easy because you can tell where the water will go. The difficulty comes in when you try to manage that water. And when I say manage, there are a few things you can do with water as it moves across your property. You can, of course, just stay out of the way and let it do its thing, but then it's going to run where it wants to. It may not end up where you need it to be. There are a couple of other options. You can slow the water down. Maybe if it's moving too fast, it's picking up silt, it's digging ditches, it's eroding the edges of your beds. Fast moving water will make it difficult to manage and maintain just about any part of your property. So slowing the water down can be very helpful. And there's a lot of different ways you can slow it down. You could just spread it out in the landscape. Spreading the water out will get it to move much slower. It won't pick up as much sediment and it won't erode the edges of beds and roads the way it will when it's moving quickly. So just spreading the water out can be an effective tool, or putting objects in the way. Just putting a bunch of large rocks in a quick flowing stream or in a ditch that's flowing too quickly can help to slow that water down, provide some obstacles that it has to run around. Some other options would be to redirect the water. If it's flowing into an area where you don't want it to go, can you build up a ridge high enough to force the water to go in a different direction? Or maybe you need to dig a ditch, actually create a low spot that the water will flow through. Digging ditches is not always an obvious thing. Sometimes what you dig ends up looking like it will go uphill, but you've got to keep that water flowing downhill. It's the only way to keep it moving. So ditches will help you to move the water away from the property, to move it downhill faster or in the direction you want it to go. But you can also store the water. You could bring it into a rain barrel and store it that way, as in rain catchment. We'll be doing some of that later on this year. Or you can build swales or hollows in the ground where the water will collect and help to push more of it underground, give it more time to absorb into the soil. And those swales are what you saw us putting around the camellias when we put the tea plants in up in the chicken yard. Those camellias have a little depression dug around them that will allow water to collect and make sure that we get as much of that water into the soil to store it for later as possible. So these are the different concepts or ideas that you want to think about when you're looking at a property. You want to start at the top corner of the property, find the highest point in the property, and then think through how water is going to move down and out of your property. Consider the places where you might want to store it, where you might want to redirect it, and then just get busy moving a little bit of dirt at a time. Eventually you can get everything worked out with a shovel to keep the water moving in the direction you want it to go. Occasionally you're going to come across situations that are going to require a little bit more in the way of machinery in order to get things done. We'll see that problem when we get to fixing the high road here on the Return Homestead. That high road has been washed out to a point now where it's going to require loads of gravel just to repair the road, and it's going to need some heavy machinery to fill in the ditches that the water has dug as it's gone racing downhill in the wrong location. It's also going to take a little bit more than a shovel to redirect that water. It's a significant amount of energy flowing downhill. But up here on the property today, all I've got to do is manage the little bit of water that just comes off the top of the property, flows down across our garden, then past the barn, through the chicken yard, and then down to the bottom of the hill where the guest house is. And then from the guest house, of course, it drops down the cliffs and into the bottom. So that's all we need to do today, is to get this water down the hill and then move it away from the house so that it can flow freely downhill without running up under the house. On the other side of the low spot in the backyard is this ditch. Now it is right at the bottom of the most severe elevation change in the backyard. So it does collect that water, does a fairly good job of getting that water and moving it quickly downhill. But it doesn't catch the water coming off of the barn. So one of our biggest problems is that the water coming out of this downspout just drops onto the ground, and there's a very significant ridge between where that water falls and where this ditch is. And so the water can't get over to the ditch. It ends up running underneath Marty's studio and on out the front of the property. So we'd like to prevent that. We want to get this dug out so that we can get this water into the ditch. We're also going to put this water into rain catchment. So I'll be building some rain catchment. Might even just do it with 50-gallon barrels like this one. So we'll collect some of the water here, and then when we fill that up and we end up with runoff, we'll push the runoff into this ditch. And occasionally when you're running ditches on your property, you're going to come across a place where there's a walkway that you need to get across. And having a ditch run across a walkway is not attractive, nor is it convenient. And so typically that will get buried underground. So just under the dirt here, or just under the grass, there is a piece of conduit that's in the ground. We know because somebody tried to dig a hole here and ended up breaking into the conduit in the process. But it does run underneath this small section of lawn and then out into the top of the chicken yard. So this was the first place that I was encountering the most problem. So the water would flow immediately out of this drain into the chicken yard, but then it would head straight down the fence line and up underneath the stairwell. So there's a little bit of a ditch here that was allowing that water to very quickly move up underneath the stairwell. And again, that's all rock underneath the stairs. So I don't mind the water going down the hill at that location, but then it does dump all that water at the back door of the house. At some point in the past, someone had attempted to dig a trench deep enough to be able to put this conduit all the way down the hill. And while they weren't able to dig a deep enough ditch because of the shallow soil, they did leave a trench here, and that trench can act as a ditch. It is a consistent low spot across the chicken's yard, and the water should follow that path if I can get it over to the ditch. So I've dug this out a little bit, pushed that dirt up into this ditch to keep it from flowing that way and try to force the water to go down the hill this direction. I'm not 100% confident that's going to work very well, so we'll just have to wait for the next rainstorm and see how that goes. This is the yard where we used to have the goats. The chickens are now using it along with their chicken yard. So the chickens have a significant amount of pasture right now they can spread out on. So you can see that water was coming up underneath the stairwell. And it would flow straight down until it hits this big pile of rocks here at the bottom. And I've gotten the rocks and the grass and dirt situated in such a way that all of the water that flows down through here gets redirected out underneath the stairs and into a ditch that runs the length of the goat yard or chicken yard. Now this ditch does carry the water down to another larger conduit that goes underneath the driveway area and then drops the water off the top of the cliff. From there it's going to flow off down the property and into the creek, and we're not as concerned about it once it moves that far. Once it's gotten to the edge of the driveway and is on its way off the property that direction, we're not terribly concerned about where it goes. But I want to make sure that all of this water, and you can see there's a significant amount of it that is still standing even in the bottom of what I've dug out so far. So the water is not flowing downhill the way I would like for it to. And I may not be able to get it to. There may not be enough fall between here and the other side of the yard for me to be able to dig this out effectively and still have the water flow out underneath the driveway. So I may need to just spread this dirt out some, or I may need to spread this water out some. Simply allowing it to spread out and evaporate at least what portions of it won't flow through the ditch. It's not ideal. It can get some mosquito problems, silting issues, which will mean I'll have to come back and dig it out again next year, which is what I'm doing right now. But it is, at least for right now, a temporary solution that will get this water moved away from the house, which is really what we're trying to do. Marty was reporting to me that her beds in the front of the house, her flower beds, are completely saturated, which means water is flowing underneath the house right now, and we want to get that cut off. I'm going to put the camera down, grab the shovel, and get back to digging here. These are probably some of the worst digging conditions you could have to deal with here. This is all extremely wet, it's silty, so it's super soft, but it's also full of rocks. And all of the grasses that have been growing in here are really fine, very tightly woven grasses. So it makes digging a hawk up really difficult, because the roots of that grass want to hold everything together so tightly. And then I was also feeding the goats leaves from trees, throwing the sticks and branches over the fence. Well, that's not a good idea. Those branches have laid down in the bottom of this ditch. And so every time I try to pick up a shovel full of dirt, I've got to pick the branches out of it just to get it up off the ground. Sometimes you gotta try to be aware of the potential unintended consequences like that. And if I had known, obviously I wouldn't have thrown so many sticks to the goats in the backyard here. I do have some techniques available to me. I have a way of building a tripod out of 2x4s that would allow me to figure out where the level is on the land here, so that I could actually measure a level line down this entire length, and then I would be able to tell whether or not I can actually get this water to flow underneath through the conduit that's buried in the dirt over there, because that conduit is only down so far. And it may not be down far enough to be able to take water on a constant fall from this level on the other side of the yard. I could try to figure all that out, but in the end, it would still mean having to dig all of this dirt back up out of the ditch. So I figured I'd get this dirt out of the way first. We'll give everything a chance to dry up some. And then on the next big rainstorm, we'll watch how the water moves through here. See if we've improved things at all. That'll also give us a chance to see where we might need to make some improvements. And just like that, Grandma's got a bunch more worms that she can come and enjoy eating. And we have a way to manage water in its process of moving off of our property. A lot of people would probably look at this and say, well, yeah, you just dug a ditch. Yeah. There's more to it than just digging ditches. This is all about maximizing our use of the resource while limiting its impact as it falls and runs off of our property. And feeding the chickens as we do so. It's all one big seamless whole. That's what homesteading teaches you. You get to see just how it all fits together. So this is one of the ways that the extreme weather we've been seeing has been impacting us here on the Return Homestead, and just some of the work that we're doing to try to mitigate the damage from all of that impact. It's not really that big a deal. We're just going to have to manage the water a little more tightly and a little more carefully. But that's something we were planning to do this year anyway. I hope we've been an encouragement to you today. We do want to encourage you to return to the land, return to labor, and return to life. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please take a moment to go in there and do so. While you have the window open, if you wouldn't mind, hit that thumbs up button. That lets the algorithm know you enjoyed the video and they'll share it out with more people. We'll see you next time. It would still mean having to dig all of this dirt back up out of the ditch. So I figured I'd get this dirt out of the way first. We'll give everything a chance to dry up some. And then on the next big rainstorm, we'll watch how the water moves through here. See if we've improved things at all. That'll also give us a chance to see where we might need to make some improvements.